We're back here with some more tech information. I am Freddie with Simmons Industries, Superliner, Speedliner, and we're here to further our discussion with sanding and priming. On our previous video, we dealt with using 40 grit sandpaper, 80 grit, 120 grit, and also using a nylon cut brush. One of the reasons why we prefer 36 or 40 grit is because it takes more time to wear down the actual grit on the sandpaper. What happens when you're using 80 grit is that you can make some good scratches, but before long, it will be smoothing the surface and not scratching. Equally so with 120 grit, you will be smoothing the surface more than scratching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to completely sand the rest of this hood with 40 grit sandpaper, and then we will properly apply our two-part primer. That is a necessary primer before you spray bed liner. I'm going to put my respirator on and my safety glasses because safety first, and that's always important. Just as a note to put in, I sanded this hood by hand just to show that it's just as effective to sand by hand as it would be to sand with the DA or with the cut brush. It doesn't take any less time or any more time. It's just for purposes of showing you that you can sand by hand, you can get the scratches that are necessary, and you can do it with the same scratching method with a sander as you could do by hand. Okay, and after you've sanded the surface, you cleared of the dust, which I've already blown this surface clear. The next step is, before primer, you need to wipe the surface down with the solvent. You have either MEK, methyl ethyl ketone, you have lacquer thinner, or acetone. Any of the three will work, and any of those three are recommended in the process. What I have is MEK. It's a high abrasive solvent, so make sure that you have on a respirator. Make sure that you have on gloves that will protect your hands. I have on some work gloves here, but I'm also going to use a chemical resistant neoprene glove, which keeps the solvents off of my hand and it doesn't eat away at the nitrile gloves. So, respirator on, safety glasses for safety so solvent doesn't splash in your eyes. Protective gear is always important. Also remember, after wiping with solvent, allow it to dry completely on the surface before you apply primer. It's an absolute necessity for it to have good adhesion to the surface.
Okay, the next step in this process, you see that I have my respirator on. It is because we are mixing 2-part chemicals that if you are inhaling them, they can cause breathing problems and breathing issues. So I have my respirator on so that we can navigate around that. So we've got part A 450 and part B 450. For this application, I'm going to mix out more than I really need to spray this hood, but I'm going to mix out 100 milliliters of A and 100 milliliters of B, which is just a little over 6.5 ounces. So most mixing cups have ounce and milliliter actual liquid quantity measurements. So I'm going to use the milliliters. So 100 of A. We're going to go 100 of B. And I always mix with the cup flat on the table. I don't pick the cup up and look at it in front of my face, because if your hands are not level, you won't mix on the correct line demarcation for your liquids. So always mix on the table flat. Put your caps back on your primer. The less oxygen exposure you have, the better you are. I'm going to mix these two components together. And it doesn't take much to mix these. They blend very well with each other. One note to put in, please do not add toner or pigment to your primer. You can over pigment this primer and you have a problem with adhesion, because your color will float to the top and will not allow you to properly adhere when you apply Bedliner to it. Just a good note to have. All right, going to pour in my HVLP. Also, equally important to note that you need to make sure your nozzles are clean and clear after every use, because the primer is sticky, it's glue. It can clog up the nozzles, which will give you a terrible fan pattern when it's time to spray your primer on whatever surface it's time for. For me, I usually set my pressure regulator to 40 psi, so when you squeeze the trigger it runs down to 25. Put a water separator on before air comes in, and I'm always using my full fan fully open, and then the base on this gun I run out halfway. Not all HVLPs are set up the same way, but it's just kind of a rule of thumb of where I start. Okay, so in this step of applying primer, I am going to apply in the recommended fashion, and then I'm going to over apply so that you also see what that looks like. Now, over applying primer is simply spraying the surface too wet so it looks like you've got clear back on the surface. So let me show you what that looks like. That's not how you want to apply primer. One, it's too much, and two, it's a slow process like you're actually painting a car. So when you apply primer, you don't want to apply in a wet manner. You want to apply to like a satin style finish. So this is how my recommendation on applying primer, and this is the pathway that I take. The reason why I apply in that manner is because you have the ability to allow the primer to dry properly. And drying properly means that it will generally take 30 to 45 minutes to dry. And that's an absolute necessity, because in the process of allowing primer to dry, if it's too wet or sprayed on too dense or too thick, your dry times are extended, which means it can go past 30 or 45 minutes. And when it gets past that point, if you apply Bedliner on top of wet primer, you'll have issues with adhesion and issues with the dry time altogether. We call that solvent pop or solvent expansion. So, not necessarily absolutely the wrong way, but not the recommended way to apply. This is more along the lines of the recommendation. Spray your primer to a satin finish and allow it to dry.
Okay, after you have allowed your primer to dry, this is ready to be adhered to with some superliner, some speedliner. And if you have any questions about this process of sanding and prepping and priming, make sure that you reach out to us, Simmons Industries Superliner Speedliner, at info at Bedliner.com. You can check our website, which is Bedliner.com, or you can give us a call at 512-990-8808. This is Freddie with Simmons Industries Superliner Speedliner, and we'll see you next time.